So I use a wired Xbox 360 controller to control synths and other stuff live. That's cool and all, but I'm thinking I should take this to the next level. So I'm gonna show you all the upgrades and changes I've been making to the system, as well as show you how you can do this too. So let's get started. So how this works is I have a virtual MIDI device. So typically when you have a MIDI device, it's an actual physical device plugged into your computer, and your computer will recognize it. You can do the same thing with DVD drives or hard drives, basically just tricking your computer into thinking that there's this device connected to it that there isn't. Why do we want to do this? The reason we need to do this is we need to create a middleman between our DAW and the software we're using to interface with the controller itself. So we're gonna need 3 pieces of software starting from the beginning. We're gonna need a piece of software that can interface with the Xbox controller and write to a MIDI port. We're gonna need a virtual MIDI port to write to, and then we're gonna need a DAW that can read from that MIDI port. If you're listening to this, you probably already got a DAW, but if you don't know what it is, it's something like Pro Tools, Reaper, Ableton, FL Studio, any of these guys. If you Google this, there's a couple solutions that have already been created, and I don't like most of them, so I use some software that are a little bit less popular, because I wanted to keep it simple and reliable and also be able to use multiple different controllers to do multiple different things and make adding and removing those very simple without having to write a lot of code myself. So some people suggest using a program called GlovePie. Was not a big fan of that, so I'm not using that. Here's what I am using. Firstly, for the Xbox controller to MIDI interface, I'm using a software called Fergo Joystick MIDI. It's free, go download it here. And for the virtual MIDI device, I'm using another free software called Loop MIDI, which is available here. And finally for the DAW, I'm using Reaper, but you can use whatever you got. So to hook all this jizzy jazz up, you're going to want to start in Loop MIDI and create a virtual MIDI port, and I called mine SYNTH MIDI port. Go listen to my band. Then over in Fergo, you're going to want to point the output device to that MIDI port that you just created. And then finally inside your DAW, if it will ever load, you should see a MIDI input device the same name. So we're using this SYNTH MIDI port as the middleman between Fergo and the DAW. So inside of Fergo, we're going to pick the controller that we have, which is the only one right now, and notice that these correspond to all the different buttons. To make sure it works, make sure to push a few buttons and they should light up. And cool, easy peasy. So the next part is a bit tedious, but it's pretty damn easy. What we're gonna do is assign MIDI outputs to the different controls that are on the controller. So start out by picking the controller that you want, and then you can either send a note on or CC, and then you pick the control scheme that you want. So for instance, on pressing button number 1, let's say I wanted to play note number 67. What I would do is pick MIDI note on, source button 1, and then boom, note 57. And you're also gonna wanna pick the MIDI channel as well. And you can have as many of these different things for as many different controllers as you want, and you can also assign MIDI CC, so if you wanna change the parameters instead of just playing notes. So what I did in here is I assigned the 4 main buttons, A, B, X, and Y, to 4 different MIDI notes here. MIDI notes 57, 65, 64, and 69. So every time I push these buttons, it'll send those MIDI notes along the new virtual MIDI port, eventually ending up in Reaper. So what I do inside Reaper is I just create a channel that listens in that same MIDI port that I set for each of those different notes, which in this case is 50. Which is the same MIDI channel that I set all the different button presses in Fergo to be sent to. And then I just added a simple synthesizer here. So this setup works great, it's super stable, and I haven't had a problem with it live yet at all. The only problem I've had is this. Having a wire on stage is quite an inconvenience, so I was like, why can't I just use a wireless Xbox 360 controller? Well, there's a few problems with that, but I got it to work. I'm gonna show you how to do that. So I just bought 3 Xbox 360 controllers off the Craigslist for super cheap, and they work great, except they don't work at all. The first problem with these cats is that you're gonna have to buy an additional piece of hardware. But it's pretty cheap, and there's even off-brand versions, but I bought the official Microsoft, so it'd have fewer problems. But I'll give you a link in the description. It's this little guy. All you need to do now is download the driver, which is a bit more of a pain in the butt than I was thinking it would be, because Microsoft's reorganized their website a little bit because they don't really care about Xbox 360 compatibility anymore, but it's on there, I promise. Just go search for it. On the off chance that you've never used an Xbox controller before, you hold this button to turn it on, it'll light up, and then you hold this button on the back here, which will set it into search mode. Shortly after you push the button on the back of the controller, make sure to push this as well. If all goes well, it'll connect right up, and you can do this with up to 4 controllers. And now in the drop down, there's just gonna be another controller that you can select from inside Fergo. And dude, it's really that easy. That's all you gotta do. But as I said before, it only supports up to 4 controllers, and that includes wired and wireless. But I strongly recommend giving this a try. It's really easy to set up, and frankly, it feels really good to play a controller live. It's really ergonomic, really fits in your hand, and it really wants to be played easily. And you can just swing it around stage, or you can run in the crowd and still be playing your synth parts. So I strongly recommend you check this out. If you got any questions, please let me know what's going on.